Thanks very much. Anyway, today's topic is hopefully primarily revision. It's the forms of the present tense. You might think, well, I definitely know all of that because I've got Spanish A-level or whatever. But there's possibly the odd nugget that you might not be entirely familiar with. But hopefully this should be primarily revision today. I'll give you a brief presentation and then we'll do some exercises to practice. So first of all, starting with the most basic tense, the regular indicative. And obviously when I say indicative, all I mean is not the subjunctive. Yeah, so, the regular present tense. Let me introduce just some terminology. We talk about conjugations, those are the classes of verbs. And as you all know, there are 3 such classes in Spanish, 3 conjugations. There's the AR conjugation, or the AR verbs, for example, hablar. The ER conjugation, such as beber. And the IR conjugation. Yes, it's important to think of the 3 conjugations. And also a nice term, which probably you haven't heard before, but it's quite useful. We can talk about the conjugation vowel. Yes, obviously, in the AR verbs, the conjugation vowel is A, isn't it? In the ER verbs, the conjugation vowel is E. And in the IR verbs, in principle it's I, isn't it? But as you'll see in a second, there's a certain degree of merger, isn't there, between the ER and the IR conjugations. And so most of the forms, in fact, certainly in the present tense, or the present indicative, you'll see that the conjugation vowel for the IR verbs is really an E. But anyway, the basic principle still stands. You've got these 3 classes defined by the conjugation vowel, A, E, or I. And here's a useful tip. The ER and the IR conjugations in general are completely identical, except in the first and second persons plural of the present indicative. So I'll illustrate that in a second. So in the present tense, bear in mind that the ER and IR conjugations only differ in those 2 persons. So here's an illustrative table of the present indicative. We've got hablar, we've got beber, and we've got subir. So in the first person singular, hablo, bebo, subo. Obviously your O is your first person singular marker, isn't it, in the present indicative. Hablas, habla, hablamos, habláis, hablan, bebo, bebes, bebe, bebemos, bebéis, beben, subo, subes, sube, subimos, subis, suben. Hopefully you will all basically be familiar with those. Possibly you may have a slight problem remembering the nosotros and vosotros forms, particularly in the IR conjugation. How many of you would have spontaneously come out with subis? Most of you? All of you? None of you? Maybe? Yeah. Who would have come out with subis as the vosotros form of subir? Be honest. So not that many. Yeah? So remember that then, it's is. There's no diphthong in the ending in the IR conjugation. Is. On the other hand, beber, bebéis. Yeah, so habláis, bebéis, and subis. So, make sure that you know these without even having to think about them. And again, notice we've got a difference here in the ER and IR conjugations in the nosotros form, hemos versus imos. But apart from the nosotros and vosotros forms, the ER and the IR conjugations are exactly the same. Yeah, so it's bebes, subes, bebe, sube, beben, suben, and obviously bebo and subo. So they only differ here in the nosotros and vosotros forms. Okay, that's the indicative then. Happy with that? Now the subjunctive, and the subjunctive too is really easy. You know, when some people say to me they find it difficult to remember the forms of the subjunctive, in the present tense, that's completely unforgivable. Because if you know the indicative, you know the subjunctive, don't you? You just change the conjugation vowel to get the subjunctive from the indicative. Yeah, if you've got an AR verb, you have a conjugation vowel which is the E basically. You have the ER endings, and if you've got an ER or an IR verb, you use the AR endings, don't you? So all you do really is just reverse or change the conjugation vowel. Yeah, so AR verbs have E in the subjunctive ending, and ER and IR verbs have A. Yeah, so, you know, if you know the indicative, you automatically know the subjunctive. Yeah, so, you know, saying something like, oh, it's really difficult to know the subjunctive in Spanish, the endings. I mean, no, that's not true. If you know the indicative, you know the subjunctive. Yeah? I'm talking about the present subjunctive. Obviously, the past or imperfect subjunctive is a little bit more complicated. Yeah, so as a consequence of that, you know, the fact that you have E's and A's, you also get rid of the O of the first person singular. So that means then that the first and third person singular form are always going to be identical in the subjunctive. Yeah, so, yo hable, él, ella hable, for example. Or if you had comer, yo coma, él or ella coma. Yeah. So here's an illustrative table. Hable, hables, hable, hablemos, habléis, hablen, beba, bebas, beba, bebamos, bebáis, beban. And here, the ER and the IR conjugations are identical. Yes, sorry, there's a mistake there. Yes, very bad. Sorry about that. In fact, I'll correct that in front of your eyes, just to reinforce that point. Suba. Sorry, I was cutting and pasting rather too quickly. Yeah, so the ER and the IR conjugations are exactly the same, aren't they, in the present subjunctive? Beba, suba, bebas, subas, beba, suba, bebamos, subamos, bebais, subais, beban, and suban. Yeah? Don't forget this accent, by the way, in these vosotras forms. What does that accent do? Yeah, it puts the stress on the ending, doesn't it? Bebais, subais. Yeah, it puts the stress on the final syllable, which happens to be the ending. Okay, there's subjunctive. You all happy with that? Now, a major complication in the present tense are the so-called radical changing verbs. Now, when we say radical, why do we use this word radical? Is that radical in this sort of political sense? You know, kind of very strongly? Is that what it means? Or does it mean something else? What does radical in radical changing verbs mean? I mean, well, in fact, have you all come across this term? Is that how it was taught in school? Yeah? Sorry, can you say it a bit louder?
The letters change in like the word, so like for example, E goes to I or something.
That's completely correct, but how does this word radical, I mean, why is that used? Okay?
Is it to do with the being the root of the word exactly?
Exactly, that's right. Radical here means root. Yeah? Radical means root. So really radical changing verbs means root, or if you like, stem changing verbs. Stem and root have a similar meaning. So radical here refers to the root. So you get a vowel change in the root or the stem. And if there are two vowels in the stem, it's the last vowel. So, for example, recordamos, but recuerdo. Yeah, you see your O becomes UE. Yeah, so your O becomes we. Recordamos, but recuerdo. And here's a golden rule. No change ever in nosotros and vosotros of the present indicative. In other words, you've always got the kind of the base vowel. Yeah, it's illustrated here, isn't it? The verb is recordar with an O, and this is a nosotros form, so there's no change. So what would be the form, the vosotros form then? Very good. Recordáis. Yeah. No change in the vowel. Now let's take the AR and the ER conjugations first. As somebody mentioned, your E becomes IE, so think of that as becoming ye. And an O becomes UE, so your O becomes we. And this happens whenever the stress, and here I mean the spoken stress, whenever it falls on the stem rather than the ending. Yeah, so you've got to think in terms of where the stress falls. So, which forms are stressed in that way? First person singular, is that stressed on the stem? Yes, correct. Second person singular, is that stressed on the stem? Correct. Third person singular, is that stressed on the stem? Yes. So all of those will exhibit a change in the stem vowel. Now what about nosotros and vosotros? They're stressed on the ending, aren't they? Yeah. So that's why you don't get a change, at least not in the indicative. And what about the third person plural? Is that stressed on the stem? Yes, it is. So you always get a change there, don't you? So this change from e to ye and o to we is conditioned by whether the stress falls on the stem or not. When it falls on the stem, you get ye or we, and when it falls on the ending, you don't get that. So, let me illustrate. Two verbs, pensar, volver, pienso, piensas, piensa, but pensamos, pensáis, and then piensan. Yeah, so you get the stem vowel change in the yo, the tú, or the el, ella forms, and also the ellos, ellas form, but not nosotros o vosotros. And then you get exactly the same thing when the change is o to we. So, vuelvo, vuelves, vuelve, volvemos, volvéis, vuelven. Are you all familiar with that pattern? Okay, very good. So ER and IR is It's pretty straightforward. And incidentally, I illustrated there with the indicative, but what's the state of affairs with the subjunctive for radical changes? Is it exactly the same as in the indicative for AR and ER verbs? Yes, it is. So what I just said, I illustrated it with the indicative, but exactly the same happens in the subjunctive. Yeah, so, if you take the example of volver, we had vuelvo, vuelves, vuelve, and in the subjunctive it would be what? Vuelva, vuelvas, vuelva, wouldn't it? And then, anybody? Volvamos and volváis, and then vuelvan. Excelente. So, that is the story for ER and AR verbs in terms of radical changes. Now, the IR conjugation is more complicated. And there are two patterns here. Take pattern 1 first. Change here is to I. And here again, the question of whether the stress falls on the stem or not is the key issue. So you get to I whenever the stress falls on the stem. But, now here is a complicated thing. You get the same change, to I, also in the first and second persons plural of the present subjunctive. Now, why is that surprising? Why have I highlighted that? Okay, that's a good point. That wasn't what I was thinking of, but that is definitely true. So far we've seen that everything seems to fit in with stress falling on the stem, but I've highlighted this point here about first and second persons plural present subjunctive. You get the same change there. So, what's surprising about that? The surprise is that... Go on. Yes, that is definitely true. But obviously, you wouldn't get a change for to I anyway with AR and ER verbs, would you? You've got the to ye and the od to way. But you're quite right. With AR and ER verbs, there's a strict prohibition, isn't there, on getting a radical change in forms like nosotros and vosotros. You're all kind of sort of, I suppose, almost getting at what I was thinking of. It's simply that these are forms which are not stressed on the stem, but despite that, you have a change in the stem vowel. Yeah? So when you get into the subjunctive, in the ER and the IR category, there are at least some forms, and here we've seen the nosotros, vosotros in the present subjunctive. There are some forms where you do get a vowel change. Yeah? So it's not always dependent on whether the stress falls on the stem. It generally is, and for ER and IR verbs, it always is. But in the case, for ER and AR verbs, it always is. But in the IR conjugation, there are some forms, present subjunctive, where you get a vowel change. So let me illustrate that with the verb medir, meaning to measure. So mido, mides, mide, yeah? You've got your change there in the form stressed on the stem, and also miden down here. Likewise in the subjunctive, mida, midas, mida, midais, midan. Mida, midas, mida, and midan. Yeah, those are all stressed on the stem. In the indicative, there's no vowel change. Medimos, medis. Yeah, so in a way that parallels what you see with AR and ER verbs. No change in the vowel for nosotros and vosotros. But in the subjunctive, midamos and midais. In other words, you get the change to I throughout the entire present subjunctive. Mida, midas, mida, miramos, midais, midan. So miramos and midais, they are quite surprising. How many of you would have known that it's miramos and midais as opposed to medamos and medais? Or if we take another verb, pedir, how many of you would have known that it's pidamos and pidais? Some of you? Very good. Well, if you did know that, excellent. That's quite a tricky detail to remember. Anyway, now I've said it, try to remember it. Yes, with these verbs that go like medir or pedir, you do have a root change in nosotros and vosotros, but only in the subjunctive, not the indicative. I suppose another way to remember this pattern would be that all forms of the present, indicative or subjunctive, have the change e to I, except nosotros and vosotros indicative. I don't know, think of some way of remembering, but whatever you do, try to remember it. You okay? Everybody clear about this pattern? Pattern 1? Yeah? Let's look at pattern 2. This is a hybrid pattern. In the indicative, present indicative and present subjunctive, you get e to ye when the stem is stressed, exactly as if you were talking about an AR or an ER verb. Yeah, so you've got that. E to ye, exactly as happens with AR and ER verbs. But, in addition, you've got this change in the present subjunctive, nosotros and vosotros, a change which is e to I, as in the IR pattern 1. Yeah, so you've got a kind of a mixture of two patterns, really. You've got a bit of the IR pattern 1, insofar as the present subjunctive, nosotros and vosotros, is concerned, but underlyingly, you've got a kind of AR stroke ER type pattern in the stem stressed forms. So this is arguably the most difficult one to remember. Sentir, to feel. Siento, siente, siente. So far, looks like it's basically a kind of ER type verb, doesn't it? Sienten, same. Sentimos, sentis. Well, again, I suppose here you can see it's an IR verb, can't you? Because it's imos and is. In the subjunctive, sienta, 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 so that parallels siento, siente, sienta. And in the ellos form, sientan, that parallels sienten. But look, sintamos and sintáis. So that's rather like midamos and midais. Yeah, so speaking honestly, would you have known sintamos and sintáis? You would have? Well, very good. If you would have known that, that is very good news, because that's very tricky to remember, sintamos and sintáis. So this is our hybrid pattern. Now, I haven't mentioned any verbs. I mean, all the verbs I've mentioned for the IR conjugation have an underlying E, don't they? The E either becomes an I or it becomes a ye. Now, what about verbs which have an underlying O? Oh. I mean, there are some in the IR conjugation. Do any of them exhibit radical changes? I'm seeing a nod here, yeah? Okay, which ones? Dormir. and morir. So there's only two, yeah? Dormir and morir. Yeah, now dormir and morir, are they pattern 1 or pattern 2? I mean, obviously, we're not talking about verbs which have an e as their base verb. We're talking about verbs which have an o. Okay, but, modulo that difference, are we talking about... Go on.
The same pattern as recordar, it comes duermo and muero.
So, are they more like sentir, or are they more like, what was my example, medir? Medir?
I don't know what the two patterns are, but it's like recordar, like pattern 1. No?
Okay. Well, the medir pattern, remember, is, what is it? You go from medir to mido, don't you? Mido, mides. So you go from e to I.
So it's not that one.
It's not that one, is it? It's the sentir pattern. Yeah? So, let's take morir. What does... well, do you want to have a go? Indicative, do you want to start? I die, muero.
Muero, mueres, muere, mueren. Morimos, mores. I don't use vosotros, sorry. And muere.
Okay, that sounds good. And if you do use vosotros, it would obviously be moris. Yeah? So in the subjunctive, what's it going to be? Muera, obviously, first person singular. Mueras, muera. Now, analogously to sintamos and sintais, your O, if your E vowel becomes an I, what does an O become? A U, that's right. So, nosotros, subjunctive, is going to be muramos. And vosotros, muráis. Yeah. And then, obviously, for ellos, you're going to revert to mueren. Mueran. Yeah, so you can see morir exactly parallels the sentir type of verb. It's just you're dealing with an underlying O as opposed to an underlying E. Yeah, and where E becomes IE, O becomes UE. And where E becomes a straight I, O becomes a straight U. Yeah, muramos, murais. Yeah? The reason I haven't shown you a specific slide with morir and dormir is because there's only two such verbs. So the main thing is to focus on what happens with the, verbs like sentir and medir. Because those ones with an underlying E are by far the most common ones. So I think that's covered everything. Is all of that clear? Yeah? Any questions about any of that? Okay. Do you want to do the exercises? And by the way, if you are one of these people who don't use vosotros, maybe if your background is more Latin American, obviously it's useful to actually know the forms, yeah? Particularly, obviously, if you go to Spain, where vosotros, the use of it will be a requirement. Yeah, so I know a lot of people, more on the Latin American side, but nevertheless, do try to remember the vosotros forms. Yeah. So, do you want to press on with those exercises for about 10 minutes, and then we'll go over them.
So what exercise is it?
The exercise on the handout. Have you got a copy of the handout? Yeah, they're... all right. There should be enough to go around. I think that... Okay. Okay, let's go over those. Sorry, we'll have to be quite quick because we're slightly running short of time. So, what are we saying then? Los políticos no... What are we saying? Defienden. Stop me if you can't see why, or you disagree with the answer, or it doesn't seem to make sense to you. Me pregunto por qué perdéis. Very good. What are we saying? Number 3. Siento. That's right. So I'm sorry. Siento mucho no haberte llamado. Number 4, nunca cierran, very good. 5, si perdemos, yeah, very good, perdemos. Obviously it's an ER verb, so it's hemos. Te recomendamos, very good. El perro no muerde, very good. Number 8, demuestran, thank you, demuestran. Number 9, no puedo ni ver a Marta, I can't even see Martha, or Marta. Number 10, solo nos devuelven un 5% del total. Number 11, apuesto 100 euros a que gana el Deportivo. So I've shown you number 12, volvéis pronto. Number 13, no apruebo tu conducta. I don't approve of your conduct. Y si pedimos un préstamo, and if we ask for a loan, ese maldito inspector de Hacienda nos persigue, that's right, persigue. Note the insertion of a U, well you've got that in the infinitive anyway, haven't you, perseguir. But that's just for the spelling, isn't it? Number 16, ¿por qué nos impiden? That's right. La entrada, why are they forbidding us the entry? And number 17, I've showed you that accidentally. A Jesús su jefa lo despide. His boss is definitely going to sack him. And number 18, ¿qué? Siguen. Siguen esperando? Are you still waiting? Oh, I've changed ustedes to vosotros, yeah? There's me using my vosotros, yeah. So obviously if it was, as it is, in fact, ustedes, it's siguen, yeah, third person. But if you habitually use vosotros, as opposed to ustedes, like I do, then seguís. Yeah, so let's change that while we're there. Siguen. Siguen esperando? All right, now, the more difficult translation type of exercise. You return, singular. Vuelves. Very good. Vuelves. You live. I'm hearing different answers here. It's vosotros, isn't it? You plural. Yeah, obviously, if you're a kind of ustedes type of person, it would be. But I'm thinking of vosotros, yeah? It's an IR verb. You're almost there. Vivís. 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 Yeah, as always, IR vosotros is always tricky. Yeah, but it's just a straight, stressed I. Vivís. Vivís. Where do we sleep? Donde dormimos. Very good. I repeat it. So your verb here is repetir, which is radical changing, pattern 1, isn't it? So,
Lo repito.
lo repito. Yeah, you all happy with that? Lo repito. Is that okay? My leg hurts. So you want to say, to me, hurts the leg. So, me duele la pierna. Yeah? What are you going to say? Hace mal. You're probably thinking of French, aren't you? Ça me fait mal, I suppose, yeah. But no, me duele la pierna. Spanish has got a straightforward verb for that, doler. Me duele la pierna. So doler is radical changing, yeah, it's an ER verb. Me duele la pierna. I mean, you could say la pierna me duele, yeah, but you tend to put the subject after the verb with a verb like doler. Now they play. Oh yeah, there's another detail here which will emerge when you give me the answer. How do you say they play? Sorry, did I miss one? Oh, sorry. The snow melts. Yeah, here's a verb for you. You might not have come across that. Derretir. Yeah, radical changing. Yeah, la nieve. Yeah, very good. La nieve se derrite or se derrite la nieve. Yeah, I mean, subject probably sounds better before the verb in this case. La nieve se derrite. Yeah, I think you've got that on the handout actually, haven't you, as a list of, or maybe you haven't. Yeah, you have derretirse, yeah, as common pattern 1 type verb. Yeah, derretirse, to melt. Now, they play. Juegan. That's right. So juegan, so jugar is a special case, isn't it? It's an AR verb, so it behaves pretty much like, the other AR verbs, but you have a strange type of change, don't you? You've got not O to UE, but U to UE. So jugar is the only verb that does that. Yeah? So it's slightly strange. Yeah? It's U to UE. Yeah, I mean, apart from that, it's always O to UE. I regret doing it. Now, regret is arrepentirse. Arrepentirse. Literally to repent. Yeah, but commonly used to mean to regret. Anybody know how that construes?
That would be me arrepiento haciéndolo.
Well, a very valiant attempt. Me arrepiento. Very good. I mean, completely correct in terms of the business of today, but that was what I was going to go on to explain. What follows arrepentirse de? What do you have? Go on. Very good, that's right. You want de plus the infinitive, not the gerund. So, me arrepiento de haberlo hecho. Yeah? I regret to have done it. Yeah? So be careful, English often has a gerund, the ing form, where Spanish requires the infinitive, haber. I don't follow politics. No sigo la política. And there's no you required there. The you in the infinitive, seguir, is required to keep the ga as a ga. I mean, if you did have a U in that form here, if there was a U here, say that. I mean, how would you actually pronounce that? Sigo, that's right. So you cannot have a U there. No sigo, la política. And number 10, by pure coincidence, turns out to be very apt, doesn't it? In view of the current discussion about surrendering and so forth. Yeah, it's entirely coincidental. But how do you say we surrender? Say that again, sorry? That's right. Nos rendimos. Nos rendimos. Yeah, so rendirse. Nos rendimos. Okay, make sure you memorize all those forms, yeah? I mean, hopefully you should be able to kind of come out with the correct form without even having to think about it. Yeah, so if you haven't done so to date, memorize those present tense forms.